Well, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to our broadcast this evening. This is the Caritas Consciousness Project, and I'm Gloria Guidu. And thank you all for joining us. And for those of you who are new to our organization, Caritas is a nonprofit. And about 6 months ago, we changed our name from the Caritas Center to Caritas Consciousness Project, and which actually describes better what we're about. And that is, our purpose is to promote the evolution of consciousness, both on an individual level and on a collective level. And we do this through our lectures, our workshops, classes, and study groups, many of which we're now broadcasting, such as tonight. Some of them are hybrid events where we have an on-site live audience as well as a virtual audience. So we've been through this little transition, not so little for me, but we also offer free spiritist healing sessions by appointment. And for more information on that, you can call me at 303-562-5695 or go to our website, caritascenter.org. Okay, so like all nonprofits, Caritas depends heavily on memberships to keep us going. Much of what we do, such as our healing work and many of our classes and study groups, are done for free or by donation. We are a charity. The events we put on, like tonight's lecture, for which there is a charge, collectively comprise very little of our operating budget. And so we need donations from and memberships. Especially memberships. So if you like tonight's program, and I'm sure you will, and if you think that the evolution of consciousness is a cause worth supporting, please become a member of Caritas, and you can join on our website. There's a membership tab at the top that you can click on, and the memberships start at just $10 a month, although there is no upper limit. So you can choose whatever level you prefer, whatever level meets your budget. Okay, so let me introduce our speaker by saying a few words about Claude Swanson. Dr. Swanson was educated as a physicist at MIT and Princeton University for more than 25 years, interspersed with his conventional professional career in applied physics. Dr. Swanson has pursued investigations into unconventional physics. His principal interest has been the unified field theory, the so-called theory of everything, which could explain the universe at the deepest possible level. This has led him to investigate many aspects of the paranormal, which appear to be completely real phenomena that violate our present science. Paranormal phenomena, which have now been proven in the laboratory in many cases, offer a window into the deeper universe and the mysteries of consciousness, and also unlock new forces and principles which conventional science has only begun to glimpse. So Dr. Swanson likes to address questions at the end of the lecture, but if you would like to ask a question before the end of the lecture, you can type it in. There's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your question there, and then he will read them once the lecture concludes, okay? So let me present Dr. Claude Swanson. Claude, are you there? Turn on your audio and video.
Mute, unmute.
Yes.
Hope everything's
okay.
On now. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Delighted to be here. tonight is the next installment in my book, Science of the Soul, The Afterlife and The Shift. And as you, I'm sure, know, each chapter looks at a different kind of evidence we have for the reality of the afterlife. We found many different ways that we can make contact with the spirit world. Mediumship is one, but there are others as well. And as a scientist, it's always fascinating to see how our science can evolve to learn how to make contact with the spirit planes and higher consciousness. The advantage for us here on the earth plane is that beings in the higher planes often have more spiritual wisdom, a much larger view of our role and our meaning, why we are here, and matters of spirit, so we can learn a lot by communicating with them. So I'm going to start the talk now, if I can click the right button here. And let me see, does that look good, Gloria? I hope.
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. And just going to go through the slideshow. So this is lecture number 6. It corresponds to the 5th chapter in my book. And there's my background, which you've probably heard several times if you've been watching this webinar series. As you know, I was educated as a conventional physicist, and so I only discovered all these weird and wonderful things involving consciousness when I came across remote viewing back in the 80s, and I discovered that there's a lot more to the universe than our Western science realizes. And I began trying to learn what those other things are, and I feel as though our so-called science really needs to be broad enough to include consciousness and include spirit, include the real world. And we're finding out that there are lots of ways that the spirit world does affect things that we can measure. So even physicists ought to be interested in these subjects, but that may take a while to get their interest. So those are the 3 books that I've written so far in this whole series. Volume 3 is Science of the Soul. That's the most recent one. Volume 1 was Synchronized Universe, where I just began looking at these strange things. And Volume 2 is called Life Force. It's all about the force of torsion, which I think plays a central role in understanding the spirit world. One of the big issues that many conventional scientists have is, well, when you die, your body may be cremated or buried. From their point of view, there's nothing left. So how can life continue? That's what they will ask. And the answer is that this physical shell that we place so much importance on is really only it's only a part of who we really are. And our consciousness, our sense of who we really are, is in a form of energy that's not the physical. When people go out of body, they are aware that the out-of-body form, the astral form, which is not physical, that's who they really are. That's where they would say, I'm located at that energy form. They can look at the physical body, which may be on the operating table or maybe lying dead on the floor or unconscious, and they look upon that as something different. Their essence of who they are is that astral body, which is the center of consciousness. That's part of the soul. And I believe that torsion is key to what that body is made of. That's what I'm kind of working on, and I have a lot of evidence in my books to support that idea. We're living in a time now where our science has advanced far enough that clairvoyants have predicted we'll begin to make contact with these higher planes. Now, of course, mediums have been doing this for hundreds and thousands of years, but Alice Bailey, in her book Esoteric Healing, channeling a Tibetan master, says, this is what she said almost a century ago. Towards the close of this century, electric devices will be used to contact departed souls, together with photographing of thought forms, thus opening a new area of spirit photography. The astral body will be susceptible to photographing, but never the mental vehicle. Yet the first demonstration of existing after death in such a way that it can be registered upon the physical plane will be via the radio, because sound waves always precede vision. And if you think of images you've probably seen in Kirlian photography, presentations like Dr. Korotkov, which show the energy form around the physical body, and that energy form persists after death, that would be probably an example of the astral body showing up on our materialistic media. Tonight we'll talk about some other ways that the spirit world has been able to communicate directly with us in some of these physical mechanisms through electronics. So that's electronic voice phenomena. Thomas Edison 100 years ago sensed and believed we would get to this point. In fact, he intuited that it was probably possible in his time, because he was one of the pioneers making early devices to measure weak, sensitive signals, and he wanted to try to record them if he could. So he wrote, if our personality survives, then it is strictly logical or scientific to assume that it retains memory, intellect, and other faculties and knowledge that we acquire on this earth. If this reasoning be correct, then if we can evolve an instrument so delicate as to be affected or moved or manipulated by our personality as it survives in the next life, such an instrument, when made available, ought to record something. And he was trying to make measurements even during his lifetime to be able to detect and communicate with the spirit world. And those of you who have listened to my talks on previous chapters know that the Skoll Project in England, which involved several mediums and other scientists and a very well-controlled environment, had messages from Thomas Edison. There were written messages on photographic film that had circuit diagrams and writing, which on the film in a closed canister that nobody could get to, and it was signed T. Thomas Alva Edison, basically, and the handwriting matches his writing when he was alive. So it looks like he's still working on this problem of electronic voice phenomena even today. One of the early indicators we have in modern times of spirits interacting with us electronically happened when two Catholic priests were trying to repair an early tape recorder back in the 1940s. These tape recorders used wire, not plastic magnetic tape, and it kept breaking. And one of them said something he probably shouldn't have said. He might have an improper use of language, which probably the Pope would not have approved of. And when he played the recording, when he played the tape next, he got the voice of his father coming over the tape recorder. So his father, Gemelli, president of the Papal Academy, and Ernetti, this was his partner, they were working on a magnetophone. That's the name they called this early magnetic tape recorder. And so Gemelli was asking his father for help. His father, of course, was dead, but the wire kept breaking, and so he asked his father to help him. And when they played the recording, it said, "Of course, I shall help you. I'm always with you, in his father's voice. They repeated the experiment again, and the voice said, but Zucchini, it is clear. Don't you know it is I? Well, Zucchini was his childhood nickname that nobody else knew. And they were scared because maybe they had communicated with some kind of spirit, some evil spirit or something, and they were afraid maybe they had transgressed, and so they asked the Pope if this was okay, or do we need to get forgiveness, or what do we do about this? And the Pope said, basically, don't worry, that this is actually just further evidence that there is an afterlife. And after that time, the Vatican became heavily involved in doing research on electronic voice phenomena itself. And here is a statement from the Vatican, the Right Reverend Monsignor Professor Flieger. He said, facts have made us realize that between death and resurrection, there is yet another realm of post-mortal existence. Christian theology has little to say about this realm. So even the Vatican is on board that these phenomena are genuine. As technology advanced, the discoveries began accelerating in this whole field of spirit communication. Two engineers, Attila von Saleh and Raymond Bayless, captured paranormal voices on audio tape, and they published them in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1959. Von Saleh had been a natural psychic, and he was able to hear voices even as early as the 30s. He said there was a tiny voice in his ear that he believed was not paranormal, but a genuine physical voice. And this voice, this tiny little voice that he's talking about, will come up again and again. It's one of the ways that spirits do communicate with us. And at this point, we've learned a lot about this voice, what its source is, and what it really means. The next step forward was Friedrich Jurgensen, 1959, had a tape recorder for bird song. So these are more high frequency. They're good for the high pitched notes in bird songs. And he was out in the gardens recording birds. There were no people around. When he came back and played the tapes back, he heard voices. There were conversations going on. They were discussing things. And it kind of blew him away, because sometimes they would be discussing him in these recordings. He published what he found, and it was kind of a sensation. He said, everything I've read or heard forces me to the supposition that only the hypothesis of the voices belonging to transcendental personalities has any chance of explaining the full scope of these phenomena. Whether it suits me or not, I have no right to doubt the reality of the voices. And so that was really the first modern inclination. And when that discovery got out, another man, Konstantin Raudova, contacted Jurgensen and learned how he did it, and began copying him using a tape recorder and just putting it on record out alone. And over time, he would ask a question oftentimes of the spirits and ask them to say something, and then just let it record. And over 65,000 messages he recorded over a year or two. And he spoke 5 or 6 languages, and so he could understand the messages. They often came in Latvian or English or French or other German. And he published a book which sold quite well under the title Breakthrough in 1971. And that's when the public at large began hearing about this phenomenon. The voices, the messages that came through were always short, like a sentence or so. But what they said is that they were in the room with him. The spirits that were speaking were right next to him or somewhere nearby in the room. They weren't coming from some faraway place. This is one, Wir waren in deinem Zimmer, that we were in the room, basically. And there were many, many messages like that. So they were telling him that the spirits were present right there. And of course, this set off a lot of experimentation, a lot of interest by scientists, many of whom were skeptical, but they began doing experiments. They would, the first thing was to check on where these sounds are coming from. They put them in an isolated room where no sounds could get in or out, and maybe the tape recorder would just be there by itself. Physicist Peter Hale of the company Belling and Lee began doing a series of experiments with this phenomenon, and he was able to prove that these were genuine voices. Nobody was faking them. There were no ventriloquists involved. And over the course of a couple of years, he said, in view of the tests carried out in a screened laboratory at my firm, I cannot explain what happened in normal physical terms. So he's a physicist, and he's telling us that whatever's going on with these voices, it's not according to the normal laws of physics. As time went on, they began discovering other things about these voices. One is the voices tend to be high frequency. The human voice goes from 10 or 20 or 30 hertz cycles per second up to maybe 10,000 or so. For some people, as maybe as high as 20, that's the max. And that's the vocal range. What the scientists were discovering is that the sounds coming in from the spirits tended to be in the upper part of that range, the high frequency part. That's why when Jurgensen was out in the flower garden measuring the bird songs, that's why he was so successful, because birds tend to have high-pitched voices. His tape recorder was set up for high-frequency sounds, so it did a good job of capturing the sounds that were present there. Some scientists began looking to even higher frequency sounds, tape recorders that could go up to 30 or 40,000 cycles per second, and as they did so, they got better and better results. So Dr. Hans Bender, University of Freiburg, was initially a skeptic, but began doing a lot of experiments with this phenomenon. And he says, an examination with better technical equipment in May of 1970 made the paranormal hypothesis of the origin of the voice phenomena highly probable. So, this is what hardened scientists concluded. They tried everything, and they found that it didn't require a person to be there. They could isolate the tape recorder in a soundproof room, and they'd still get these voices. Ted Bonner of Decca Records and RTE, who oversaw many of these tests, concluded this is no trick. This is no gimmickry. This is something we have never dreamed of before. So this is what was happening with EVP in the 1960s, 1970s. Another skeptic was Hans Otto Koenig, who used a Rhodope-style system, but he increased the bandwidth to the higher frequency range, up to 40,000 cycles per second, which is about twice the normal audio range. And part of this modification was because in these experiments, they had a dog who had been present in some of the laboratory experiments. And they would notice that the dog, when listening to the recordings, would pick up his ears and respond, even when they couldn't hear anything. So the dog was responding as though he heard the voices, even when they couldn't. And dogs have a higher frequency range. So that made them think maybe it is the higher frequencies where these voices are primarily located. So they improved the technology got higher frequency recordings, and the accuracy of the voices became much better. So the next question is, well, okay, how can you explain this? We have these paranormal voices that these people are recording. How is that possible? What are these, and what does it mean? How can we connect it to the science that we know? And what I've developed a little theory for what the connection is, and it's based on orbs. We've all seen photographs of orbs. If you read my books, you know that it's possible to get fake orbs, a dust particle near the lens of a camera, a water droplet, or an insect, when it's close to the camera and there's a flash photograph, can make that look like an orb. So you have to be careful that what you're seeing is not one of those. But there are many genuine orbs as well. When I was doing paranormal experiments with some friends in Virginia, I took a battery-powered strobe light out to a cemetery, and it would flash periodically near a tombstone, and we would watch it from 30 or 40 feet away. And unfortunately, I didn't have a synchronized camera to be able to catch these images, but you could just watch it with your eye. And whenever there was a flash, not every time, but occasionally, when there was a flash, you'd see a little bubble that would be present in the air, hovering over the tombstone, just for the instant when the flash occurred. And the bubble looked about 2 inches in diameter. Now, given that it's far away from your eyes, you can't explain that as an artifact from lens flare or from bugs or water droplets or anything. And your eyes, because they have binocular vision, you can tell how far away something is and how big it is. So we could all tell that these orbs were genuine near the tombstone, not near us. So that's just one example of how real these things really are. One of the first clues I had that this is a genuine and a universal phenomenon was a story about Sylvia Browne when she was 7 years old and was brushing her hair in front of a mirror. And as she's doing so, something comes up to her ear and begins speaking to her in a high-pitched feminine voice. And it's telling her not to be worried, that it's from heaven, it's from God, it's a very benevolent spirit, and it begins talking to her. And she was somewhat upset, kind of freaked out. It was basically a little orb that it was hovering near her ear. And she went and asked her mother, and her mother explained, "Hey, this is your spirit guide, dear. Don't be scared." And it just tells us that these things are around us. Her mother knew very well what these were. As I looked further into this whole subject, I found that there are lots more examples of orbs that can speak and that can talk to us. It's actually well known in some cultures. The Hawaiian kahunas recognize this voice. They say that the soul has a part, a component that can speak. It's a little orb and it has a voice. They call it uhane, which means ghost that can talk. And this is one way that their ancestors speak to them, through these little orbs. That's the form they come in. They have voices and they can talk to us. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, these little orbs also are what generate the EVP messages that have been recorded. Native Americans have a ceremony called Yuwipe, which is a healing ceremony. When someone in the tribe needs healing, they'll tie up the medicine man with cords in the middle of the lodge, and there often be gifts and sacrifice gifts and things around him, and they'll begin chanting and singing. and praying. And as they do so, they report that little objects begin flying around their heads. Little orbs begin whizzing by them around in the darkness, around their heads, and they can see them and they can hear them. And these little orbs have high-pitched voices. And they say, these are our ancestors. We are calling them in the prayer, in the ceremony, to come and help us in the healing process. And this is how they appear, in the form of an orb, and this orb does have a voice. So this is known in many traditional cultures. So we would call these orbs, it's a small sphere about 1 inch in diameter, like a soap bubble, capable of reflecting light, which is why it shows up on flash photography, but also in some cases able to give off light as well. And it's capable of vibrating, because we have several examples of people who can hear the high-pitched little voices that they have. In the book Na Solar, that Chico Xavier wrote through automatic writing, there is the story of his communication with Dr. Andre. In fact, there's several volumes in this story. And in one of them, Andre talks about going back to Earth. He's in the afterlife, but he's given permission to go back and visit his family, to check up on them. When he does so, he's in the form of an orb. He's in a small sphere, basically, floating around in their house. He can look out, he can see his children, he can see his wife, he can see the house, and he can hear what they're saying. So this is what the world looks like to him when he's inside the orb. They didn't know he was there. But that is one story that can help you understand what an orb really is. It's our center of consciousness, and we have it even in the afterlife. Another example comes from Jenny Cockle, who wrote a couple of very wonderful books about her past life memories in Ireland, which became a movie, I believe. She had very clear memories of dying early in her last life and leaving her children, leaving 5 children at a young age, and she was heartbroken having to leave them when she was a mother. And so she came back as Jenny Cockle, remembered vividly a lot of the experiences of her past life. And a TV program actually paid to do some research and had her come to Ireland and write down all of the things she remembered, and then found the children that she had left when she died. They're still alive today. They're grown. They're all adults now. Some are getting up in years. But, it was heartwarming and heartbreaking to hear the account when she met her own children after coming back in the next lifetime. One of the events she talks about is a regression, hypnotic regression, when she was taken into the past life, into the life between lives, and she said, I found myself floating inside something like a soap bubble. Above, below, and all around me were other bubbles that I knew to be people. I was bodiless, and this didn't seem to matter at all. I was still aware of being myself, an individual soul. Every bubble glowed brightly with an energy that I took to be the basic life force that is ourselves. So again, we have an account of somebody inside one of these bubbles, inside one of these orbs, and you can see how the world looks to them. I mentioned the cemetery and the 2-inch orbs that we were able to see hovering around them with the stereo, with the strobe flash. And there's also a theory, which is probably correct, that the size of the orb has something to do with the level of consciousness of the being that is manifesting. Although most orbs of humans that we know about are about 1 inch in diameter, and the ones I saw in the cemetery looked about 2, and maybe there's something about the conditions under which we see them that has an effect. But in one of the experiments I did back in Virginia, one of the people in my group, who was young but very psychic, was walking back to the cabin and saw this thing hovering in front of her. It's about 3 feet in diameter. This is daylight, it's around 4 in the afternoon. She had a little camera around her neck, and she says, "I thought it wanted me to take its picture." So she picked up the camera, snapped the photograph, then it moved away, and then she immediately forgot about taking the picture. But it's an example of how spectacular orbs can be in some cases. Here's a close-up of that orb. You can't quite see it in this image. It probably needs to have some good photographic processing to bring it out. But the trees that are behind it, you can actually make out through the bubble. And it's reflecting the light in the sky above it. And there's a porch pillar behind it that you can also see. So it's an amazing photograph of how a big orb looks. And to me, you can't fake these things. It's so impressive when you see them. And because of the way it interacted with her, it just confirms my opinion that it's intelligent. These are beings. These are spirits. They're beings. It's part of who we are, really, in our spirit or our soul form. I got together with a well-known Colorado ghost hunter named Christopher Moon. I guess maybe he's down in Texas now. I'm not sure. But he does a lot of EVP. He has different devices for communicating with spirits. One thing he took me to was the house he grew up in. He said that there was a place in the basement near his bedroom where at a certain time of day, there'd be a crack, a little noise that you could hear on your video camera. And orbs began streaming out of this pointed space in the bedroom. Hundreds of orbs began streaming out and then going out in different directions. I think this is how spirits visit the earth. When Dr. Andre in Nasolar talks about visiting the earth, visiting his family, I think they have to re-enter our earth dimension, our earth plane, in a certain manner. And it may be that there are certain portals where that transition is easiest. And that's what Christopher was describing. He also said that at other times of day, the orbs would come streaming back into that same point in space in his bedroom and disappear. So he felt they were going back to the spirit world after having visited or done whatever they came to do. So he knew these orbs all of his life, basically, which may be why he became a ghost hunter. And he took me there because I wanted to get some good orb photographs and learn what he knew about what they are. And I had a night shot camera, and he had a night shot camera as well. These are video cameras that have a good near infrared range. They can photograph things in the near infrared and are pretty successful at photographing orbs. We had our cameras set up. All the lights were out. It was total darkness. Couldn't see a thing. I was looking at my viewfinder. He was looking at his viewfinder. He was saying, "There goes one. There's one. There's one. There's one." He was seeing orbs. And I was looking at my viewfinder. I didn't see anything. And I know they move quickly. And I believe that he either because his brain works faster or because he had more practice looking for them, he was able to see these things much better than I was. So I said, well, could you get them to slow down so that I can get a picture of one? So he spoke into the darkness of the room and he asked the orbs if one of them would appear in the viewfinder from my camera and move slowly so I could photograph it. And within a second or two, the top image appeared in my camera. There's a structure across the room, but in the middle there, you see a white circle, which is added later, and in the middle, a white dot, which is about an inch or so in diameter. That's an orb that just popped in right after he asked for one. And then in the next 8 or 10 frames of my camera, that little orb moved toward me and to the right in a very leisurely, slow manner. Every frame captured it. You could see it very easily. And I had my proof that these orbs listen to us. They listen, they communicate, they respond, they're conscious. In case there was any doubt, that settled it for me. So the question is then, well, okay, they're conscious, they can vibrate, they can do various things, they can speak. How can we explain EVP, given that orbs exist? Is there a way to do that? Well, it turns out that Christopher Moon, while watching his orbs in his basement with his video camera, had seen them occasionally dip into his tape recorder. His tape recorder was running, and just he was seeing a little orb go down into the recording mechanism around where the recording head is, just dip in for a second or so, then zip out again. And he noticed that afterwards, there was a message there on the tape. It was quick because everything's kind of sped up. The orbs move quickly. They're speaking high frequencies. There's something on the tape, but it's a higher frequency little blip. And so you have to use electronics and software to slow it down so you can hear it. And he found that they were indeed messages. So this is how the orbs were leaving messages on the tape recorder. They were using the orbs and their little vibration ability to create a vibrating message which would come out as a sound. And here is a model of what that looks like. The bottom picture represents a tape recording head, the little rectangular solid there, and the orb, the little blue circle, goes down into the recording mechanism where it's vibrating, and it comes back up again. As it vibrates, it's leaving a voice message on the tape. Another method that these EVP researchers used was an antenna. The antenna would be tuned to some local radio station, and that would give a high frequency vibration on the antenna, which would then be modulated, that is, they'd be varied by something else, in this case, an orb. When the orb crosses the antenna, it's changing the strength of the signal that's being recorded on the tape recorder or the sound recorder or whatever it is. And that changing of that signal makes a voice. So they were able to leave signals with that mechanism. So there's several different variations of EVP devices that were developed in the 60s and 70s. And every one can be explained by this idea that it's really the vibrational orb that is making the signal. And this is the model that I proposed in my book. I'm the first one that's actually done it in writing that I know of. And to me, it explains a lot of these EVP measurements that have gone on. And here's just one more illustration. Again, you have an antenna, you have a radio signal making a voltage that's going back and forth on the antenna. There's a diode there that's turning that vibration into a signal. And then when the orb crosses that, it can vibrate again and leave a voice message on the electronic message that's being recorded. So I think this can explain almost all of the EVP phenomena of this type. So this is a sort of summary of that type of EVP. This is my theory, but I think it's on pretty good basis, given that it matches what Christopher Moon saw and so many other things that we know about orbs. Now, George Meek was a businessman who was interested in these subjects, but he wanted to talk to spirits to get a little higher quality of knowledge. He noticed that these EVP messages they were always short. There were only a few words to a sentence at the longest. Sometimes they involved profanity. Sometimes they involved sentiments of a lower spirit. Even the nice ones didn't have very much that was profound to say. And he wanted to make contact with a higher spiritual plane where he could learn something really beneficial, very enlightening. And so he wanted to find a way. He thought there's something about this technology, and you can see from this hypothesis that it's the orbs. Well, that's kind of a lower level of communication. We can revisit the earth as orbs when we're in the lower astral planes pretty easily. But as we advance to higher and higher planes, it's more difficult to come back to earth as an orb. So you're kind of limiting the level and the quality of people who you're going to find with orb communication. So Meek wanted to find some technology that would talk to the higher spirits. He began seeking out mediums who could help him make contact with higher spirits who had some technology, some scientific understanding, and asked them how he could do this. How could he design a device that could make it to these higher frequencies and speak to these more enlightened beings? So I really admire this. This is the logical way to go. And what's amazing is he was successful. And let's see what just happened. One of the first people that he succeeded in making contact with on the spirit side was a physicist named William F.G. Swan, who had been dead several years, but had been well known as a scientist when he was alive. And he gave him advice on how to build something to reach the higher frequencies. So that was sort of the highlight of what he had been able to distill from his research. So one question that Meek asked him was, have any of you, speaking of Swan and his colleagues, because he found out pretty quickly that Swan wasn't working alone. Swan enlisted other spirits who were highly evolved to help him out. And one of the things you learn from researching the afterlife is that there are laboratories over there. People don't just float around on clouds playing harps. They actually do things that they love to do. So if you're an artist, you may be spending your time over there doing great paintings, creating paintings that you didn't have the time or the resources to make on the earth. In the same way, there are scientific labs, and scientists can explore new ideas that they wouldn't have had the resources or the time to do here on Earth. Robert Monroe, the creator of the Monroe Institute, the hemisync technology and out of body, has a nice little lab back in Faber, Virginia, where you can go and, some of the basic technologies that are there. But he passed away several years ago, and one of his colleagues, Rosalind McKnight, reached him in her out of body experience and was talking to him and asking him, well, what are you doing now? And he went on and on about the wonderful laboratory that he had built in the spirit plane. And in the spirit plane, all you have to do is imagine it. You can manifest whatever you want. You're not limited by budget. And he said he loved it. It was great. He had the best laboratory you could ever imagine. And that's the way science goes in the afterlife. So in the same way, when Meek made contact with a swan, he asked him about these things, and there were other scientists helping out, trying to put their heads together to see how they could best help Meek to come up with something. So Meek is saying, have you heard about Jurgensen's work in Sweden? And he was trying to say, well, he's operating between 1,500 and 1,600 kilohertz on the broadcast band. And he was trying to find out, well, is that high enough frequency? I mean, where should I be operating? And Swan responded, they are working in an altogether different level of existence than we are. So they're really in the lower astral plane. You will find, as I said, that we have gone beyond the use of energy in forming words, but we work with the power of intelligence. It will not be as easy as it is on the lower frequencies where the energies are expressed as sound. And this was his first clue that he had to take a different route to go to EVP in the higher spirit planes. So Dr. Swan, according to Meek, desired to help us in our research and assemble a large team of colleagues from the highest astral and the mental causal planes. By 1975, my engineering analysis indicated, at least to me, that the EVP approach, which is the old approach of Jurgensen and Raudeva, held very little prospect of achieving meaningful and extended two-way conversation at higher levels of consciousness. So this was Meek's goal, was to have extended conversations with these more evolved beings. One of the messages that Meek got after he'd been working on this for a while and had developed one of his first generation devices that could reach the higher planes, he got feedback from one of these spirits. They said the machine in the laboratory in Philadelphia, that's one of his devices, has been a great revelation to us. Our domain has been invaded from time to time by much of this type of thing, except it was foreign, and we have taken all means possible to exclude it from our area. Most of it is very disturbing. We also might mention that we are troubled in some instances by what we call the cling-along phenomena, the energy that we use as it rushes through our rarefied area creates what you would call static. We cannot entirely eliminate it. We have short vibration transmissions going on all the time with the various models we have made. The principal model on which we are working is that which is designed to connect with what you built yourselves. So one of the really fascinating aspects of this whole process of electronic voice phenomena is that you find that the spirit world wants to communicate with us too. They have a long history of speaking through mediums, or attempting to communicate directly with psychically gifted individuals. But they also have a problem that humans are often skeptical that it's really the spirit that it's claiming to be. The church has made us afraid that maybe it's the devil. Maybe it's masquerading as something nice when it's really something evil. And so be careful. And if a spirit claims that it's somebody famous, like Gandhi or Winston Churchill, then be very skeptical and suspicious. So this whole process of being listened to and having open, honest communication has been a painful one for those in the spirit world who try to raise our vibration and our level of consciousness, but it requires us to be able to listen and to really accept what they say. And so the EVP technology gives them one more possible route to communicating with us. They'd like to lift us up to a higher level of consciousness. Many of these scientists in the afterlife say that they have so many advanced inventions and technologies they'd like to give us that would make the earth a garden, would get rid of our pollution problems, get rid of our energy problems, lots of things. But the mentality on the earth is such that we tend to turn them all into weapons or use it just for self-enrichment. And so it depends on our consciousness if we can receive these things and use them properly. But there is that desire to make contact. So they're really trying to work with Meek and try to accept what he's saying and help him out. And sometimes in some of these cases, they develop more technology on their side that helps our inventions, and more of the progress is due to their own contribution, not ours. So here they say, in this conscious cooperation with you, we're attempting something which our group has never attempted before, namely to work on two planes, you on yours, we on ours, and put together in such a way that it'll manifest physically and on your plane in a massive communication device which will transfer communication directly. So that's what they're talking about. It's a wonderful prospect, and that is what Meek was sort of on the edge of. This marks an epoch in the relationship of the inner plane of life, the high astral and mental plane, in which we live. This is what the spirituals say. And you on your plane of existence. This is the conscious cooperation across the boundaries of the inner dimensions and into time and space. So it's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, a lot of the promise of some of these early breakthroughs, and there are some really marvelous cases that happened as a result of this, but because of human conflict and human ego and human competition, they found that those energies were not very pleasant, not very conducive to making this whole process work. And in general, they tended to back out over time from some of these efforts. It's kind of saying it's up to us as humans to evolve a little further, develop a little more brotherly love, get past our ego, past our competition, so we can have more harmonious cooperation with them. So here's Swan, again, this physicist who's been dead 10 years or more. And now they have the device working, the Spiricom, the Meek Spiricom device working, and he's speaking through it. And he says all creation must come to the realization that all are one, that there's no difference in any being, and that all are parts of each other. This is the key message. This is the key spiritual message, really, that our souls are immortal, but they're all part of one great soul. They're all part of the universe, part of universal intelligence, part of God, if you want to use that word. It's the universal intelligence that we all came from, that we're all a part of, and that we're all moving back toward. So all together, he says, together through all the worlds and different suns and their solar systems are part of the whole. That whole is the oneness of the all. Since we have undergone a second death and rebirth, that means that he's graduated beyond the astral plane. He's up in the mental plane now. This is the second death. It is natural that our philosophy has expanded. Here, work is for the joy of accomplishment and for the good it may be for those on the lower planes. And so you can see from these wonderful thoughts how delightful it'll be for all of us as we learn to better make contact with these enlightened beings on the higher planes. This is the photograph of Bill O'Neill, who was the principal helper for George Meek. This is part of the device called the Spiricom that Meek built from communicating with these spirits. O'Neill did most of the work. O'Neill, not just an electrical engineer, but also a gifted psychic and medium. So when these spirits came through, initially he could hear them and see them with his intuition, but also implement electronically what they were telling him to do. So just the perfect kind of helper for George Meek. And one of the first spirits that began giving a lot of help to O'Neill was a fellow named Doc Nick. And he told him how to modify his device so the voice of the deceased doctor could be heard on an electrical circuit. And another scientist began to come through after a while. And this was another doctor, Dr. George Mueller, who had died May 31st, 1967. And he was a very famous scientist. I'd worked at the Los Alamos National Lab and several other prestigious organizations in the U.S. And then he died 10 years before this whole experiment, but a very accomplished individual. And he began also giving messages to George Meek and O'Neill. And just to show you, illustrate how real these spirits are, that there's nothing faint or flimsy or imaginary about our consciousness when we pass on to the higher planes. This is Dr. Mueller speaking from the high astral or the mental plane. We're not really sure which. And he's talking to O'Neill, who's on our earth plane, working with an electronics device. And here's Mueller saying, William, I think the big problem is an impedance mismatch into that third transistor. O'Neill, third transistor? Mueller, yes, the transistor that follows the input. O'Neill, I don't understand. Mueller, the preamp. O'Neill, oh, the preamp. Mueller, yes, I think I can easily correct that by introducing 150 or 100 ohm, I'm not sure which, William, 1/2 watt resistor in parallel with a 0.0047 microfarad ceramic capacitor. I think we can overcome that impedance mismatch. Neil, oh boy, I'll have to get the schematic back. So this shows very clearly that our intelligence doesn't disappear when we die. That as spirit forms, our soul, our awareness, our knowledge is still very real, very much alive. We have access to it. And eventually this device did some amazing long-term communications. They were able to talk for many minutes, even maybe half an hour or so, speaking through it to the spirit planes. This is just a little schematic of one part of the Spiricom device. Basically, the difference between it and the EVPs that go back to the 1960s is it worked at a higher frequency. It was up in microwaves, up in the gigahertz regime, which is billions of cycles per second, not hundreds of cycles per second. So much, much faster frequency. And he uses a tone generator, and that's really to produce something that sounds like a voice. But they also have these little antenna section in the middle where they're transmitting and receiving a radio signal. So if you're a spirit, you can probably put your body, your energy form, in the way of this antenna transmission and affect it, and you can modulate it. That's my guess as to why some of these little gaps show up in their device. Another gap they have is a special room with a microphone and a speaker, and they send sound waves across the room, and there's a gap in between there. And this is all part of their technology. So my suspicion is that this is how the spirits can intervene and affect the signals and create something that you can hear. So George Meek concludes from a lot of this research, we have learned that before perfecting Spiricom to the point that it can be a useful day-to-day working reality, man must learn far more about several types of subtle energy. And if you know about my work, I belong to the Subtle Energy Organization in Colorado, ICEE. I was on the board there. My second book, Life Force, was inspired by a lot of work that they were doing on subtle energy. I came to really appreciate that's the healing energy that Western science knows very little about. That's the energy that the Chinese call qi and the Hindus call prana. There's many different forms of it, but subtle energy is a very important kind of energy that our Western science has ignored so far. So my book, Life Force, was an attempt to describe that energy and make it as scientific as possible to say, how can we deal with this energy? How can we make this into a science? So here he's talking about the same thing. That's subtle energy. And they're forces or systems which lie completely outside what is now recognized by science as the four basic forces of nature. And this is the big bugaboo with present Western materialistic science. That, and this has been true for 50 years or more, they will tell you that these four basic forces, and of course they leave out subtle energy, they leave out torsion, they leave out qi. They don't have a place for these special energies of consciousness that I think Meek is really using here. So here's Meek saying, thought must be recognized as an energy and means for observing, detecting, measuring, and possibly photographing it must be developed. The same applies to the energy forces involved in all psychic activity. So I totally endorse that idea, and it's such an important statement that he made. So it may be that the work on torsion energy developed by the Russians back in the 1950s and discussed in my book, Life Force, may be the energy he's talking about here. Things have gone on further since this work by Meek. Meek has passed on. But there are some recent breakthroughs that may be more due to the spirit world's contribution than to ours. At the end of the Spiricom manual, George Meek wrote, in 1981, meaningful two-way, normal voice conversations were carried on by a Spiricom Mark IV over a period of many months with an American scientist who has been dead since suffering a coronary failure in 1967. So that's sort of how that book ended. And that's sort of the end of that chapter, the Spiritcom chapter on EVP. The next chapter starts off with mostly German and Dutch researchers in Europe who developed other technologies. Basically, they were making loops with a television camera and a television screen or monitor, and they were feedback loops, and then they were being given instructions from mediums or from the spirit world on what to do. And what they found is that images often began to appear. And this is an image that has been identified as Konstantin Raudova. But at this point, Raudova has been dead for a number of years, but his image showed up on one of these devices, which they call ITV, instrumented transcommunication devices, in Germany. A lot of this new chapter is due more to help that we were getting from the spirit world. And this is one of the people on the spirit side who communicates with this German group. And Susan Salter is her name. And what they say is that they've been working on their own technology to help us. So oftentimes on our end, all we have to have is a computer or a printer or something really simple, and they're able to generate signals that we can receive. So these are, and they say that this planet, they call it a planet, is in the astral or the mental plane. It's not probably a physical plane, but they've been quite helpful with the Europeans in developing this communication. But again, they emphasize that it has so much to do with the spirit of cooperation that we have as we go into these projects. They say that ego gets in the way, competitiveness gets in the way. We need to get rid of envy and conduct ourselves in the right way to be able to make contact with the higher planes. This is sort of a closing message from this higher plane. Your present level of knowledge cannot measure or even identify the many dimensions beyond the physical. We're just really at square one in terms of our understanding of the higher planes. Still, you place your trust in that limited area of human endeavor that many among you, even some who believe in the continuance of life beyond death, sometimes are skeptical of messages which you receive from these dimensions. As you share the information you receive, they say, you do so out of blind hope, wishful thinking, and fear. Your task is not an easy one. And so the research continues. And I'll just end with my favorite quotes as we try to blunder our way into these new areas of science where there's so much to learn and we are so stretched, but there's so much opportunity and so much excitement. Albert Einstein said, whoever undertakes to set himself up as a judge in the field of truth and knowledge is shipwrecked by the laughter of the gods. And he also said, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? And Bob Monroe was right when he said, through prayer, meditation, visualization, we can create the world we want. And Victor Hugo said, all of the armies of the world are not as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I think the time for these ideas is now here. So thank you very much. Website is synchronizeduniverse.com, and you can also contact me at claudeswanson@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and we'll go on to questions, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Claude. That was fascinating. Really
You're welcome. Thank
fascinating. I don't see any questions at this time. So maybe everyone was too mesmerized.
you. Or maybe they're asleep. I don't know. Should I hit
There is
stop share now? Do I hit
sorry?
stop? Do I hit stop share now?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
There is one chat
Okay.
from Lorana.
Okay. Hi,
I
Lorana.
am pronouncing that right.
Yes.
She says, thank you so much for the fascinating and informative lecture.
Well, thank you, Lorana. Yeah, she's been following my work, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I had a question, though.
Okay.
Kind of a silly question, I guess. When you were talking about the Lakota,
Yeah.
what was the purpose of tying up the medicine man?
That's a good question. You'd have to ask them. I mean,
Oh, okay.
from a scientific point of view, it's nice to know that he's not doing anything trickery, no trickery involved, that he doesn't go anywhere. Now, I think they say that at the end of the ceremony, when the lights come on, he's been untied, but they really try to totally immobilize him. So I think it's showing that the spirits are helping him too.
I see.
And there are ceremonial offerings and things, I believe, that are part of this network of ropes and things they use to tie him with. But I'm not much of an expert on this. It's pretty amazing. It'd be fun to attend one of those sometime if they let me.
Mm-hmm. I had another question as we went on, and I didn't write it down, and now I can't remember it.
Chico Xavier? Was it about Chico?
No. One comment maybe. You were talking about how they were only reaching the lower spiritual realm, the spirits of lower frequency.
Yeah.
And the Spiritist literature tells us that the lower spirits can much more easily act on matter. The higher spirits, because they have a more refined, higher frequency, it's harder for them to act on matter. So what they do when they want to, manifest something, they engage a lower spirit to do it. Like next time where there were all the table turnings and, lower spirits can do that. But the higher spirits at that time wanted to send these messages about the spirit world. They wanted to, share information during that period in the 1800s, mid 1800s. And so, so even though some of the phenomena was composed of matter, moving around and tapping out messages, tables tapping out messages and that kind of thing. It was the messages themselves could be very profound.
That's very interesting. Thank you. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And so it was the higher spirits getting the lower spirits to tap out. Isn't that funny?
That is. Now, a question came on from Cynthia Aubrey, but it went away again.
Oh, let me see. I can hear. There's one from Mary Wright.
Okay.
It says, thank you for a wonderful talk. Your work is interesting and valuable. Keep up the great work. May God bless, guide, strengthen, and protect you on this journey of light. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you. Let's see. My little Q&A has a 1 beside it.
That's what it was.
But Cynthia Aubrey had something that popped up in a blurb, but now it went away.
Oh, yeah, she has a chat.
I see it's over here in the okay, I see it here. So in terms of orbs can visit here, Do mediums then possibly hear Orbs' voice in terms of spirit messages, i.e. clairaudience messages? Well, that's interesting. So in other words, are Orbs talking to mediums, I guess?
Yeah.
It's possible. Since you're a medium, you could tell us.
As far as I know, I've never spoken to an orb, but I don't know because I've never seen an orb. I've seen them in pictures, but I've never
Well, and it depends on how good your high frequency hearing is also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guides and sometimes other spirits, but I don't. I've never seen an orb.
Uh-huh.
I've seen spirits,
Yeah.
that have human shapes.
Yeah.
But I've never seen an
Well,
orb.
you've seen spirits that have human shapes.
Yes.
Okay.
Other than in photographs, I've seen many orbs, but and Marianne Sperry had a very interesting video. Did she share that with you?
I haven't seen it, no.
Oh, I asked her to share it with you. It was a video of orbs just racing around this room, just going all over the place at a very, very fast, zipping around.
Uh-huh.
And it was a video that either she or someone she knows took.
Uh-huh.
And I don't remember the details, but she showed it to me and I was astounded.
Uh-huh.
You better send that to Claude. And she said she was going to, but she probably forgot. I'll remind her.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So have you heard, I've seen presentations, where they play, like Mark Macy did a presentation where he played a video of spirit speaking through, I think it was a TV. There was a lot of static and you saw an image, and I was impressed with what we were hearing and seeing, but I was not impressed with the message. It was very
It was a video image?
Yeah.
Okay.
On a television set.
Okay.
With a lot of static. But you did see an image.
Yeah.
It was
that's
like
probably the ITV.
Yeah.
The German stuff, yeah.
But the message was not anything that you would write home about. I don't remember what it was. It was years ago.
Yeah.
But I wasn't impressed with the message, but I was impressed with the fact you could hear a voice.
Uh-huh.
Could see the image.
Yeah. Yeah. What Mark has told me is that, and I don't know if this has changed or not, but as of the last time I talked to him, which was a year or two ago, that a lot of the contacts had slowed down because of this whole issue of competitiveness and things like that with the earthly researchers, that we have to get our act together to.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a certain level of coherence, right?
Yeah.
In order for, probably for them to get through.
Well, I think it's the same thing that bothers the afterlife scientists, because if they give an idea to somebody and then he just uses it to make $1 million, that doesn't seem like that wasn't the point.
Right. Yeah, intention plays a role.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Nobody's asking questions. See if I have a question. You need to change the date on that slide about Alice Bailey.
Oh.
It said 2007.
That was probably the book that I was referencing it from.
Well, because
that wasn't when she said it.
Esoteric
Healing, or was that what it was?
Esoteric Healing.
Uh-huh.
But that was not published, maybe a later printing.
Yeah, probably later printing. I can check that, but I probably used the printing that I had. So
Okay. Um,
yeah, I have a quote from Sri Yukteswar that is also recent, but I know he made his original pronouncement back in 1895 or something a long time ago. But
he was Yogananda's teacher.
right,
Master.
yeah, yeah, he predicted a lot of these scientific discoveries of the early part of the 20th century before they happened.
Mm.
So
As,
the whole issue of causality and is important.
yeah. You know, one of the things, this is not exactly EVP, but one of the things that Alice Bailey experienced with her spirit mentor, Dwal Kul,
Yeah.
the Tibetan, was direct writing, where she
Is
would.
that different? Automatic writing, same thing?
No, direct writing has the medium plays no part, physically.
Yeah.
So she would ask a question, and then she would ask a question. I don't know if her question was written or not,
Uh-huh.
but she would be. I think one time she was, I don't know, walking, maybe even on a bus or something. Did they
Yeah.
have buses already? And she looks down and she sees a piece of paper on the floor of the bus, and she picks it up, and it was the answer to her question.
I love it.
Cool. So direct writing, the medium doesn't, is not, the spirit is not using the medium's hand.
Yeah.
Nor is the medium doing any writing at all.
Yeah.
It just appears on the paper.
Paul Brunton, in A Search in Secret Egypt, talks about meeting an old fakir, an Egyptian magician, who has these spirits who work for him, basically. And he did things for Brunton, like you take a piece of paper, you fold it up, you put it over here, then ask the question, then open the paper up, and the answer is written there.
Yes, that's direct writing.
Yeah, so the spirit does the writing, apparently.
Yeah. But I've tried it and it didn't work. I don't know why.
Yeah.
They don't do it for me. Yeah, it's you were saying how at a certain point they stopped. But in Kardec's time, Kardec was the founder of Spiritism.
Yeah.
I was explaining this last night to my Spiritism 101, or 2 nights ago, class. At a certain point, in Kardec's time in the mid-1800s, what started with the Fox sisters in Hydesville, New York, just became a big phenomena.
Uh-huh.
They had all these seances all over the world, and things would fly around the room, and balls would spin around and go up and down. And there was all this physical phenomena. And at a certain point, the spirit said, okay, enough. Enough of that. And today you hardly ever hear. You hear of occasionally like a poltergeist phenomena.
Yeah.
But that's not what that was, That was not random. It wasn't destructive or anything. It was just to get people's attention, I guess, and to show that, you can't explain this. Because the first time Kardec himself, who was a man of science, the professor of science and math at the Sorbonne University in Paris, the first time he encountered, as a skeptic, right? Encountered table tapping, where the table's leg was tapping out, 1 tap for A, 2 taps for B, and tapping out words and sentences. And he was checking under the table for wires, convinced that there must be some kind of hoax, but eventually he did the research, and then he was convinced.
Yeah.
But it's funny because people say, well, if it was happening then, why isn't it happening now?
Mm-hmm.
And I just say, well, you have to ask the spirits because they're the ones in charge, you know. But I think they just wanted to make a point, I guess, get people's attention. And then they said, and now you have to act on what we've shown you.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it also makes you wonder whether maybe we have done something to our environment, perhaps all the electrical energy or everything else. Maybe that interferes a little bit too. Perhaps it's more, I don't know, whether it's more difficult now for spirit phenomena. I don't know.
They say that the veil is getting thinner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I keep hearing that and reading
Yeah.
that. I don't know. I asked Dean Radin when he was doing his broadcast if he thought more and more people were developing faculties to be able to, mediumistic faculties to communicate. And he said he didn't think so, that we were just hearing about it more.
Mm-hmm.
People were being more open. Not sure I totally agree with that. It's hard to say because we definitely hear more about like near-death experiences with all the advancements of resuscitative technology.
Yeah.
So we do have more evidence than we ever had before because of things like that. But I was under the impression that, human population as a whole was becoming, I mean, as we raise our vibration, if we are evolving and if we are on an ascending cycle of the yugas,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then it would stand to reason that there would be more.
Yeah.
Not right away, but
the cycles are pretty long, so we may have
thousands and thousands of years.
They get impatient.
Yeah. I mean, if there is a noticeable shift, then that shift should include, raising our vibration, and that increase in vibration, I would think would make it a little bit more, would make us more sensitive to these other dimensions.
Yeah, if it happens the way I talk about it in my book, which is sort of the way that Corey Good and David Wilcock talk about it, if that's the mechanism, then it's soon, it's within a decade or so, but that it may be that as the conditions change, it's still, I mean, our frequencies, it'll give us more of a range of frequencies where we have the opportunity to connect to higher planes, but it's still up to us to do the meditation and focus our frequencies so that it may feel like we're more scattered, like we're being pulled in all different directions, and it'll be up to us to keep the focus to make sure it's in a positive, productive way.
Yeah. Spiritism, in spiritist circles, the way that we communicate with our guides is the medium has to raise their vibration, through focusing and, going into a slightly altered state.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spirit lowers theirs.
Yeah.
You kind of meet in the middle. Then you can communicate.
Yeah. William Buhlman talks about that too, that he's going out of body and he wanted to influence a pencil. And he learned that he had to think himself to a lower frequency to get down into the earth plane to really be able to move a pencil. So similar idea at a lower level, but the same idea.
Right. I think we have another question.
Oh,
Ledesma. Have you heard of computers speaking? I have been communicating with a particular loving spirit not a master, for several years, and he speaks particular words through my computer.
Wow.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I've heard that they do speak through computers. I've never.
Well, that's kind of what's happening with the ITV stuff in Germany, that
Mm,
they're using computers and electronics to, communicate.
yeah. So let's see. It's 8:35. If there are more questions, we could stay on for another 25 minutes. But if there are no more questions, then I don't know. Do you have something that you wonder about, Claude, through all this research that you're doing of, things that have been experiments and things?
I'm sure I do. Nothing is occurring to me right at the moment that I can think of. But
I mean, mysteries that are still mysteries. I'm sure there's plenty of them,
yeah, yeah,
certainly on my end.
yeah,
There's all kinds of things that I can't wait to find out once I'm on the other side.
yeah, yeah. You hope you can get all the answers.
Maybe not all.
Make sure you make arrangements so you can tell somebody here. So.
Yeah. I heard a story once about, it was a celebrity, and I don't remember the name. I heard this probably 20 years ago. This very famous celebrity had died, and a close friend of the celebrity was very mediumistic and was able to converse with, every now and then they would have conversations.
Uh-huh.
And one day the celebrity's friend on this plane said, humans, I mean, so many of them are so afraid of death. Is there something that you could say to reassure them? And I'll let them know. And if it comes from you, maybe they would be reassured. And the celebrity said, tell them it is absolutely safe. I thought that was a very good answer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I still love Daniel Wrinkly's quote that I mentioned in my talk, that you're as dead right now as you're ever going to be.
Exactly. Yeah, Isabel Hickey said that too. She said when a baby is born, we're so joyful, and we say, here they come. And those on the other side say, there they go.
Uh-huh.
When someone dies, we're sad, and we say, there they go. And those on the other side say, here they come.
Yeah.
And she said, so what is birth and what is death? We're much more dead down here than we are in the spirit world.
Yeah.
So, a lot of mysteries. It's too bad we don't remember more from our life.
Well, I think this is the plan. This is how it works,
Yeah.
One thing that they do say is that many of the ETs who are coming here now are much more advanced spiritually than we are, and many of them are born with full memory. So they don't have to lose it. They've graduated.
Yes.
So that they don't have to. They're not kind of starting off on the earth plane, that level. So.
Yeah, and some humans also remember much more than others. My spiritual teacher back in the 70s, around 1970, he would occasionally meet someone and could, I think he had memories of his past lives, or one or two of them, and he would also occasionally say, oh, we knew each other then, how accurate it was, I don't know, but judging by so many other things that he did, I would have some confidence
Yeah.
that it was accurate.
Yeah. I know people who say that to me, but I always say, well, tell me more. And I never
Yeah,
get.
I mean, there's nothing you can prove. I mean, that's the thing with
Yeah.
even past life regression,
Mhm.
how do you know it's not your imagination? And I asked Linda Backman that question because she does a lot of that.
Yeah.
Um, and she said there are certain clues,
Mhm.
but that you look for to that differentiate an
Mhm.
imagination, an imaginative travel or
Yeah.
lifetime
Yeah.
and an actual memory. She said, but in a way, it doesn't really matter because if you work with that life, whether it's imagined or real, it
Mhm.
helps. So I
Yeah.
thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. So let's see if there's anything else. No, I don't see anything else.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Patricia, if she's still here. Um, um, so can you elaborate a little bit more on how this spirit who communicates with you through your computer, are they just kind of random messages like at random times, or do you sit down and say, okay, now we're going to talk, or now would you do you ask a question and the spirit answers, or do you sit down at your computer and just see a message that was left there by the spirit? In other words, is it in real time, or is it, you know, or is it through email? How does it appear? That's my question. Let's see if she's answering. I've been practicing asking him to repeat his name, and he often does. Is that pretty much the extent of the communication? Um, hmm. I'd be curious, like, no, uh, email. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's okay if you don't want to elaborate. I'm just curious about these things. Like when a message comes, does it just appear like somehow on the desktop, or are you in a particular program? But it's okay if if it's hard to describe, it might be hard to describe. Well, Claude,
Well,
yes,
I'm okay with calling it a night if you are.
I am. Yeah, I
Well,
think.
I
Oh,
enjoyed it. Yeah.
wait a second. Oh, Mary Wright is saying something.
Okay.
Is the science of the soul, the afterlife, and the shift available in electronic format?
No, it's just hard copy. It's a paperback hard copy, and so I can. I've been selling them, preferring them either come to my website, synchronizeduniverse.com, or just email me at claudeswanson@gmail.com. So just do it directly to me. That's how I've been doing it. It's all hard copy.
And Patricia did elaborate a little bit. She says, sorry, I use a transcribing program called Dragon. Are you familiar with that, Claude?
I think so. Isn't that one that where you speak into it and then it turns into text?
Oh, probably. Yeah, that would be a transcribing program. Mary Wright says, thank you, I will.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mary. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's really fascinating, Patricia. I think that's very cool. uh, okay, thank you so much, Claude. And we should announce that we're going to take a little break for the holidays, November and December. We're going to wait until January to do the next, which will be part 7, right?
It's the next chapter, whichever that one is. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't looked it up.
Chapter 6, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be chapter 6, part 7.
Okay.
Since we started with the 72
The introduction is part 1. Right.
That was part 1. So
Yeah.
part 7 will be chapter 6.
Right.
I don't have the book handy, so I don't.
Yeah, I can't. I used to know, but all by heart. But it's all fading. But it is what it is. I'm not sure.
So that will be in January, and we don't have a date yet. But watch your emails or check our website, caritascenter.org. And while you're there, click on the membership tab, and please become a member so that we can continue this work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Claude.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.